So very, very big welcome to everybody to the Better Public Media online panel. This is, of course, a bit of an experiment. We haven't done it before. So far, it looks like it's going pretty well. There may be teething troubles. If by any chance you find yourself logged out, please just come back in and we should be here. There are a few housekeeping rules. Some of you will already know how Zoom works, but if you hover your mouse over the bottom left part of your screen, you'll see a mute button and a stop video button. So for now, it would be probably quite useful if everyone can mute themselves, because otherwise, if a lot of people are sitting there, we get background noise and feedback. And we're going to take questions after the speakers, but we'll do this through the little chat function. And if you click on the little chat box, there's a little message box appears, and you can put your name up there, or you could even type your question if you're keen. So we'll use it that way. Hopefully everybody can hear us. If there's anyone that isn't getting the sound, I don't know. Could you maybe put something in the chat box now? I think most people are picking us up by the sounds of things.
Clear as a bell, Peter.
Excellent. Thank you very much. There's also an option for gallery view where you can see everyone lined up, and this is at the top of your screen. If you want to click on that, you'll see a whole range of people doing strange things, unless they stop their own video. So if you are in your pajamas and you want to be modest, then you can switch off your video and you'll still be here and you can listen. So I think that's probably all we need to do in terms of housekeeping. So the schedule is that we've got effectively two sessions that will run. Starting with Elizabeth Kerr from the Save RNZ Concert campaign. And then we've got a panel with Simon Wilson, Jeremy Hansen and Finlay Macdonald, mainly talking about the Bauer magazine situation and other wider media issues. I'll say a little bit about the state of the media environment, and Myles will wrap up. And then we have, for those of you who are keen and Better Public Media members, we have our AGM, which probably won't be a very long affair, but if you're a member, you're very, very welcome to join us. If you're not a member, it'd be wonderful if you could join us, and the subs are very, very modest. So let's get things rolling. I'd like to give a very, very big welcome to Elizabeth Kerr from Save RNZ Concert FM. So, Elizabeth's had a long career in arts management and governance. She actually was a manager at RNZ Concert in the 90s and the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. She's also worked for Creative New Zealand. Earlier this year, of course, you'll probably know her as one of the organisers behind the so far successful Save RNZ Concert campaign. So a very, very big welcome to Elizabeth. And if you'd like to take the podium virtually, you can unmute yourself. Do we have Elizabeth?
Yes, we do.
We do. Thanks, Elizabeth.
And thank you. If you've given up a beautiful sunny afternoon to be here, good on you. There's probably going to be some walking time later. So I'm going to talk for about somewhere in close to 15 minutes, I'm sorry. But anyway, I hope what I'm telling is quite an interesting story, and then there'll be a bit of question time. So thank you for the opportunity to tell you about the campaign to save Radio New Zealand Concert. I'm going to begin the story on February the 5th this year and talk about how the campaign developed and about the different strands of the campaign. And then I've got a few comments about where we are now and what might happen next, because this campaign is still very much alive, and those of us fighting for this cultural taonga are not satisfied that it has a guaranteed and secure future. So on Wednesday, the 5th of February, the day before Waitangi Day, Radio New Zealand management called its music team together and stunned them with a proposal to radically change Radio New Zealand Concert, the organisation's fine music network. It was a brutal proposal. Concert FM nationwide transmission network would be taken over for a new youth-oriented project. Concert would be accessible only through streaming or an AM network shared with Parliament, all members of Concert's highly skilled and in many cases long-serving staff, including on-air presenters and producers of recorded programs, would be redundant. The on-air offering would become a 24/7 computer-generated playlist with no human curation, and there would be no live presenters to introduce or inform the audience about the music. Within just a few hours of this becoming public, consternation spread throughout both the arts and the music communities and Concert's devoted audience, and this campaign began. I'd like to comment briefly on my own role. I've been credited with leadership of the campaign, but in fact, this campaign has been a grassroots gathering, a spontaneous expression of rage and outrage from a huge community of people who value concert. I was just one of those people, and the several strands of the campaign developed as separate initiatives. I have attempted to pull those strands together into a coherent whole and to ensure all parts kept to clear and consistent messages. Like several other people on February the 5th, I immediately thought, what can be done and what can I do? And my first move was to contact Russell Bailey, my editor at the New Zealand Listener, to advise them of what was happening and to offer a story. I suggested either an opinion piece or a more detailed investigative story, and they quite rightly decided I would not be seen as impartial. And so I began writing the opinion piece that they published the following week, alongside no fewer than 8 pages of editorial content and 2 pages of letters about the issue. Also on that Wednesday, Margaret Goldberg, I hope Margaret is here, and her percussionist husband set up an online petition to save RNZ Concert, addressed to the chief executive of RNZ. It was in fact one of 3 petitions. And another group set up immediately a Facebook page called Save RNZ Concert. And I'd like to pay tribute here to the admins of that page who played a vital role in giving the many people who cared about the network a voice, and for their wise moderation of the page. Some of them are here today, and thank you, Andy, Ari, Michael, and Eddie. The numbers that responded to these initiatives surprised everybody. Within days, the Facebook page was followed by 10,000 people and soon rose to over 13,000, where it remains today. And in less than a week, 26,000 people had signed Margaret's petition, which was promoted on the Facebook page. Prominent New Zealand musicians, composers, arts professionals, and politicians at home and overseas weighed in protest on both social media and in the mainstream media, and wrote to ministers and RNZ management. Voices like Helen Clark, Kiri Tukanua, Jonathan Lamalu, and many others spoke loudly against the proposed changes. On the following Monday, so that's how many days is that? Thursday to Monday, whatever. The Prime Minister, who's also the Arts Minister, offered another frequency as a solution to the FM network aspect of the proposal. And the RNZ board announced the next day that Concert would keep the FM network, which was in any case already allocated to it in legislation. Some people at that point seemed to think this was enough, but we did not. Around that time, I moved in alongside the petition organisers to offer support. Margaret and I decided to close the petition at the end of Tuesday, February the 11th. The staff of the music team had a redundancy threat hanging over their heads, and we felt there was not much time to get the message to RNZ management. We then attempted to arrange a meeting with Paul Thompson, the chief executive of RNZ, to present the petition. His first answer was no, he wouldn't meet with us, then maybe, and after a few chats to his EA, I secured a yes. However, that meeting was withdrawn when he became aware that several media outlets, including Stuff and his own Checkpoint, wanted to cover the presentation of the petition. We were pretty disappointed with this response, and we made the point to media who turned up and on Morning Report the next day that 26,000 people who had signed the petition addressed to him deserved the courtesy of a few minutes of his time and attention. We got some pretty good coverage of the petition presentation anyway. It was received by a couple of members of his PR team, and meanwhile RNZ's Checkpoint's Lisa Owen held her boss's feet to the flame in a tough interview the previous evening, and Catherine Ryan did the same with the chair of RNZ, Dr. Jim Mather, on 9 to noon, after RNZ had had a rather challenging annual review with the Economic Development, Science and Innovation Select Committee just a week after announcing its plans to eviscerate Concert. We also offered to present the petition to Ministers Ardern, Robertson and Farfoy, and the Minister of Broadcasting suggested that since the petition had already been received by RNZ, he didn't need to receive it too, but he was willing to meet, an invitation we very quickly accepted. And at that meeting, he made it clear that the government had indeed heard the message from the thousands who had written to them. In fact, ministers and also electorate MPs and RNZ apparently received a tsunami of correspondence. I also took a hand in the messaging on the Save RNZ Concert group Facebook page, making sure that that very committed group was kept well informed of developments, that they had access to the huge number of media articles generated by the campaign, and that they remained focused on the longer term objectives, which I'll talk about shortly. On the page, we offered some advice about messages to government too. Because I was Concert FM's manager in the 90s, I know the organisation's workings pretty well, and as a contributor since, I've maintained relationships with the current staff. Numbers, as you know, are useful in telling a story, and I was able to use facts about budgets and audiences. And from my time at Creative New Zealand, I do understand the workings of government to some extent and how to communicate with ministers, and I've got close connections with many people in the arts sector. And the arts sector itself has played a major role in the campaign. I believe that the RNZ board and management, shamefully, had no idea how important RNZ Concert is to the arts sector. It's a multiplier of arts funding. It's a vital hub for music and arts organisations. Its team of skilled staff records and broadcasts live concerts, champions musicians through interviews and broadcasts, and has contributed to the international careers of many of our shining stars. As well as many prominent artists writing and speaking about the importance of the network to them, 2 other campaign initiatives stand out. Public protest events were organised, led by Gina Sanders, a musician and music teacher from Auckland, with lots of support from composer Claire Cowan, choral conductor Brent Stewart, Kirsten Mason, who manages Orchestra Wellington, and many other people in regional centres. These events, which took place in 6 cities, attracted thousands of musicians of all ages, plus concerts audience members. And through them all, we showed that people of many ages and ethnicities value concert. The events took a celebratory approach. The first one was a concert cum party at Parliament on Monday, the 24th of February, which was actually Concert's 87th birthday. And the rest of them were on the following Friday. And we were all very cheered when Grant Robertson, in his role as Associate Arts Minister and also wearing his finance hat, agreed to speak at the Parliament protest and assured those present that the only proposals ministers were interested in considering from RNZ, and I quote his words, were those building on the strengths of concert. And the other strand was that the 3 professional orchestras, Auckland Philharmonia, Orchestra Wellington and the Christchurch Symphony, engaged the services of 3 prominent QCs on a pro bono basis, and a legal challenge to the RNZ proposal was prepared. The first stage of that challenge was presented in week 2 of the campaign. The campaign, as you may have noticed, has attracted a lot of media attention. Between the 5th of February and the 18th of March, there were over 90 media stories about RNZ Concert and the campaign. There were some great stories generated by the public protest concerts, and there was a little surge in March after the first tranche of RNZ documents were released under the Official Information Act, documents which demonstrated that the board's significant decision had been made on recommendations backed up by very skimpy evidence and almost no consultation. All those stories, by the way, are collected in date order on the blog of former RNZ employee Richard Hulse, if you want to have a look. So where are we now? Well, in the face of such trenchant and widespread opposition to their plans, RNZ wisely withdrew the whole proposal. It is now off the table. Before we all went into lockdown, RNZ management began working with the music team, of which the majority are concert staff, on a future plan for the network. Although I understand that the beginning of the process focused mainly on restoring trust between the parties. That process, like many other things in New Zealand, is currently on hold. And meanwhile, the concert team are doing an outstanding job of serving their listeners with on-air offerings and some new initiatives, including live-streamed musical events in partnership with arts organisations, like the NZSO musicians in their living rooms, combining in chamber music, and also a new special session for children at 11 o'clock each morning. All the staff are working from home, except the on-air presenters. I reckon audience numbers, which already compared very favourably with those of similar stations overseas, will have risen since February, and especially under lockdown. Many people have commented how invaluable the network has been this past month. It always contributes hugely to the well-being of New Zealanders, and its live recorded music, which just this week won yet another International Gold Award, has demonstrated its quality and importance. But the concert team members have still not been given an assurance their jobs are safe, nor that the network might not be subject to depredations in the future. So our campaign will continue to talk to government about legislative and funding solutions, and to Radio New Zealand about ways the network can be enhanced and developed. It's perhaps not widely known that the attempted destruction of concert goes back many years, with 2016 a particular low point when half the team were made redundant, more sections of the program were automated and budgets were slashed. Many activities, including live recordings of concerts and feature programs, were reduced. For RNZ Concert, sadly, the enemy has mostly been within. And so the Save RNZ Concert campaign will continue with the objective of a strong, vibrant, well-resourced and secure RNZ Concert for the future. We're looking for development of this network, not just confirmation of the status quo. One final point. My discussions with ministers and other officials suggest that the proposed merger of radio and television is very likely to become a reality, though the timeframe is uncertain. For our campaign, the role of concert in the merger is of high interest. And as a small cog in what is likely to be a fairly large machine, concert may be vulnerable. So our campaign is ready to continue to fight for this taonga in the future broadcasting environment. It is much too important to lose. And during the AGM that will follow the session, we'll present a proposal that Better Public Media works alongside us to help us meet our future objectives for the network. Thank you. I'm very happy to answer a few questions if we have time.
Okay. Kia ora, thank you very, very much indeed for that. A big virtual round of applause. I don't think we have a clap function on here, and if everyone unmutes to applause, then we'll have terrible feedback. Now, I'm just looking if there are any questions. There's Jan who's had her hand up for a little while, or had her hand up. Jan, did you have a question, or was that an accident? Maybe it was.
That was a clap.
It was a clap. Oh, right. Did you have a question or not?
I thank you.
If we do have questions, if you click on the chat box and just send a little note, just say hello, and we'll put you on.
Peter, there's a question from Philip Grimmett in the chat.
Oh, right. So, sorry, Philip. Do you want to ask a question?
Try and get this thing going. Hopefully I'm coming through. Yes, my ears picked up when it was mentioned, there was reference the enemy within. I'd like to ask that awkward question.
Am I still unmuted?
Yes, yeah, go for it, Elizabeth.
I think certainly from the years when I was working at Radio New Zealand in the 90s, and certainly from probably about 2013 onwards, there's a sense within the organisation that concert is something of a minnow and that it is not appreciated by the rest of the organisation. So when I say the enemy is within, I'm not pointing the finger at any one person. I'm just suggesting that Radio New Zealand sees itself primarily as Radio New Zealand National and not Radio New Zealand National and Concert and all the other parts of itself. And so we've got a situation where a very small group of staff who in fact have an audience that's about if you take the total concert and national audience, concert's part of it is about 40%. And yet that's delivered by a tiny proportion of the staff. And it's not really looked after. And it's increasingly more than not looked after. It's actually actively
Neglected.
That's a polite way of saying it. Yes, it's neglected. And so that's really what I'm saying when the enemy is within. It's not that concert is being attacked from outside, it's being attacked from inside. And there's a very strong sense that there's a kind of stereotype of the concert audience, that it's a bunch of old white people who are sitting in the lazy boys. And actually, this is so untrue. I mean, we proved that with the public protest. There's a whole lot of people. Concert actually has a bigger audience in the 10 to 39-year-old age group than national. Which is, or 10, might be 10 to 29, but certainly in younger people, there are more of them listening to concert than to national. So yes, Radio New Zealand's whole audience skews older, but it's not the case necessarily that concert is part of that.
Okay.
Yes, well,
Thanks,
you.
Liz. We've got three questions. Myles has asked to add a point. Then we've got Rosie and we've got Jeff.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, the point I just wanted to make was just adding to the RNZ TVNZ merger. When that was announced in February, around the time of the RNZ Concert announcement, Whāwhoi was asked if RNZ services, non-commercial services, were going to remain non-commercial, and the answer to that is that the news services will remain non-commercial. That's in the cabinet paper, and Minister Whāwhoi himself said all RNZ services will remain, existing RNZ services will remain non-commercial, but the cabinet paper just says news services, non-commercial news services are going to remain non-commercial, which obviously means that potentially RNZ Concert will be commercialised. And also it means that if there's a new youth network that is established, that could be commercial as well, which is obviously a really significant concern and something we need to really keep an eye on. That was the point I wanted to make.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, no, I agree with you that that's something really worth monitoring.
Sure. Okay, Rosie, please.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, Rosie.
Hi. So I have asked this question before. Concert management and board have received a tsunami of public feedback, but are they preparing to do a proper consultation with its stakeholders, actually counting the audience properly, approaching the audience in a different way that they did before, which I believe had lots of holes in it? And my other question is that my understanding is that the staff have been asked to provide to devise the strategy going forward. And this seems to me a bit like asking a group of experts in one field to do something that they're not really expert in another. Sure contribute, and that's important and valuable. But do you happen to know if there's any movement on that, if they're actually seeking professional help with both proper stakeholder engagement and also proper strategy development?
Well, I'll answer that in two parts. First of all, I think that the initial suggestion, which was that concert staff should come up with the plan to develop the network, is now off the table, and the consultation with staff is on a different level. That's my understanding at the moment. But of course, it all ground to a halt when everyone went into lockdown and went off to their bedrooms. In terms of consultation with stakeholders, I've not heard anything from anybody that has been agreed to. And it's something that we should continue to push for, because I really do believe they completely, they had no idea about the arts sector's involvement with concert. They had no idea how important concert was as a player in the whole ecology of the arts sector. And that's something that really needs to be looked at.
I think it'll be really good if representatives from the Save New Zealand movement worked with them on developing the questions that might be asked.
Yes, well,
yeah.
we have yet to directly establish a working relationship with Radio New Zealand management.
Right. Okay.
But we have talked to government in various ways.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes, then we're going to have to move on to the next panel. I think Jeff was next.
Yes, kia ora. I'm just wondering about attracting new listeners to Concert FM. Someone like me who doesn't really listen to it much, but will listen to national radio playing Fiona Apple this afternoon, for example, which is not pop. Would Concert FM actually move into those more interesting music areas to electric and electronica to actually widen its audience?
Now, did you say that you don't listen to concert very often?
Not very often.
No, because if you did, you'd probably know that it's already in those areas. But I mean, management of concert is not my business really. But certainly it is doing a wide range of music. Yes, it's primarily what we would call classical, but there are many other areas explored as well. And I think the staff would really like to develop that area of their work and broaden their offering, and that's something that may come out of.
Yeah, it just seems, I mean, it sounds a bit trite, but there's a perception that I hear amongst my colleagues that, you know, they don't like anything that's actually electrified. It tends to be acoustic or string. Well,
there's programs like Sound Lounge, which has a great deal of that kind of repertoire in it. They tend to be specialised programs and specialised time slots. But yes, I think all of that discussion needs to be had really, because for the last 3 to 4 years, that quite small team has had its hands tied behind its back in terms of development. That to deliver 24/7 radio with that number of people, most organisations in the world think they walk on water.
Okay, I think we've probably got time for 2 more questions. Gavin contacted me earlier on. Gavin's got a point, and then there was is it Fari? So Gavin, do you want to have a quick question or make a clarification?
Well, it was just a point of clarification. I sat on the Chief Executive Working Group that developed the new entity for public service media. I know you can never say never, but I can assure you that at no stage during those deliberations was there ever any suggestion of commercialising the existing services of Radio New Zealand. In other words, commercialising either concert or RNZ National.
Grant Robertson, when he spoke at Parliament, spoke very clearly about the fact that New Zealanders wanted good public broadcasting, and I got that strong. I think he may have even used the word non-commercial.
Yeah, that was clearly our recommendation.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. And probably the last question for this session, we can pick up the discussion later perhaps, but from Fari about lobbying for youth radio. There was a question there.
That's actually from Phil Harrington. Phil, can you hear us?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I was just saying, when Radio New Zealand put up the proposal, they were going to say that they wanted the space for a youth radio, or they wanted to have more youth content. Where the hell is that lobby? And how are they still around somewhere pushing for it? And how will they impact a future structure?
Well, we've stayed out. Our campaign has pretty much stayed out of the whole youth radio thing. I mean, personally, I'm very happy for them to have a youth radio network. I don't have a problem with that. I just don't have a really big problem with them wanting to take Concert's FM transmission and budget to do it. And so I think it's quite a big thing to set that up. I haven't seen any evidence that the research has been well done, or that the strategy has been well developed.
I remember Tim Finn and Arthur Basting, bless him, being very strong and pushing for a youth radio back under Helen Clark's government, and it fell over because I don't think Helen went for it. So I presume there is something out there still that's looking for some space or some bandwidth.
Well, they've got a network now that's been offered to through the Ministry of Culture and Heritage. So the network is available. There's a certain amount of capital expenditure involved to get that network up and running. It's a frequency, but there's a lot more to be done before it's broadcasting. But well, it's all modelled on Triple J in Australia. Triple J's been going for decades, and it started in a different world, really. So I just don't know whether today it will be that easy to attract an audience to youth radio. But I'm not prepared to really go there, because we decided as a campaign we weren't going to say don't do youth radio. That wasn't our business. We were saying don't neglect or reduce concert, and that's where we sort of stuck to our knitting on that. And I think our government and our Prime Minister probably are quite interested in the whole youth network thing and reaching a younger audience and reaching a more diverse audience. All of those are laudable objectives, but I think there's a lot of market research, background, everything to be done before you can say it's a good idea.
Okay, thank you very, very much indeed, Elizabeth. Again, a large virtual round of applause from everybody in our virtual space. Thank you very much. We have to move on. We can pick up some more debate later, but I'd like to introduce our next panel, and I'm hoping we now have Simon Wilson, Jeremy Hansen, and Finlay Macdonald. Can you say hello, gentlemen, just to make sure that we're talking to you?
Hello there, Finlay here.
Hello, Finlay. Kia ora.
Jeremy here.
Kia ora, Jeremy.
Kia ora.
We've got
sure if Simon's with us. Actually, I have been emailing him, but I haven't heard yet back from him. So
okay, well, we might proceed with present company then. So hopefully Simon, who's obviously previously editor at Metro magazine and editor of Consumer Cuisine, currently senior writer with the Herald, will join us. We also have Jeremy Hansen. Jeremy was editor of Paperboy magazine. It was a Bauer startup that ran for a period in Auckland. Previously, he'd edited Home magazine. He's been a journalist and a TV presenter. He's currently in public relations for Britomart. And Finlay Macdonald, of course, was a long-time writer and editor at The Listener. And he's written and managed several other publications and publishers. He's been a television presenter, and as of, I think, this week, he's editor of The Conversation in New Zealand. So very, very big welcome to Jeremy and Finlay, and hopefully Simon in due course. But Jeremy, would you like to pick up the conversation, please?
Yeah, sure. I actually started at what wasn't Bauer then. It was Australian Consolidated Press at Metro magazine in 1993.
Sorry.
And worked there for 3 years, and then had a second stint from 2005 editing Home magazine, and then Paperboy for 14 months till that was shut down in very early 2018, and I was made redundant along with the rest of the team then. And I had a sense then that Bauer, like most other modern media companies, especially the ones that are heavily print focused, was in some trouble, but I was still genuinely shocked by the closure, and I felt it was also a bit opportunistic of them to use COVID-19 as cover for some much deeper business problems that have been around for a long time. Sorry, I was thinking you might ask questions rather than I don't have a long statement.
You just want an ongoing dialogue, or Finlay, do you want to pick up the conversation and
we can chat, Finn.
We can chat. The only catch is if we have 120 people chatting at the same time, it's going to get difficult. But Finlay, would you like to continue?
Well, if I pick up on what Jeremy was saying about the sudden closure of Bauer, I think I'm still in shock about it, to be honest. And I think because we're all locked down in individual bubbles, no one's really had a chance to process it very well. But what Jeremy said is right. It felt very much immediately like COVID-19 was cover for something that they had wanted to do for some time, but probably wouldn't have been able to get away with quite so cleanly in a normal situation. I mean, of course, I mourn for the Listener and all the other titles, not least the Woman's Weekly, which is even older than the Listener, and which has, you know, just as important a place in the cultural history in New Zealand. But I also feel that the writing was on the wall for some of those titles for some time. I used to look at more recent editions of the Listener magazine for some years and do one of the things that becomes a habit when you're the editor, which is count the full page ads. Jeremy would understand. And to be honest, there were hardly any full page ads in the Listener for a long time. And so that means it was running on circulation revenue, which, as far as I know, is just a really unsustainable model, even if you've got a fairly healthy subscriber base like the Listener did. So unless a new advertising or business model had been found for a magazine like the Listener and probably some of those other titles, it was going to happen anyway. Something catastrophic was going to happen. It happened, you know, really suddenly, but there is an argument that, you know, titles, magazines, newspapers, all kinds of publications do have you know, a limited lifespan. Once upon a time, Life magazine was, you know, possibly the largest circulation magazine in the world. It doesn't exist anymore. The Bulletin in Australia dwindled until it was shut. There's no kind of immutable law that says anything, no matter how culturally iconic it is, must and will survive. That's sad, and I don't think that means that you couldn't reinvent something like the Listener in another on another platform, perhaps. I don't know what kind of future it could ever have as a physical object made of paper and ink. So maybe I'll stop there and someone else can pick up.
Well,
I think there were lots of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go for it, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think there were lots of reasons. I think there were lots of mistakes Bauer made. We shouldn't sugarcoat those. For example, they had a useless digital strategy, and you could also argue that the way that their sales structure was arranged meant that magazines like the Listener and other titles tended to get neglected in favour of the cash cows for a long time, which were Women's Day for a while, and the Women's Weekly and those kinds of things, until that revenue stream started to evaporate. So they made a lot of errors, and they didn't serve, especially their journalistic titles, well consistently. I think that what we're seeing here is a local manifestation of a global problem, because you have the same thing happening in giants like Condé Nast in New York, and of course in London as well. And even digital startups like BuzzFeed and like Vox have been laying off staff lately, despite attracting millions of dollars in venture capital when they started out, and also attracting large audiences. I think that the truth we can't hide from is that Facebook and Google have gobbled up all the revenue that used to go to, a huge proportion of the revenue that used to go to media. And the question we're left with is the truth that this journalism, and also the cultural reflections that you would see in things that aren't necessarily classified like journalism, such as Home Magazine, which I edited, for example, which is specific to an architecture community, and some people would dismiss it as, you know, escapist or lightweight, but it's also a journal of record for an aspect of New Zealand culture. But that in the absence of the model that used to work, where these printed objects would attract advertising, there's still the public need, especially in a time of huge misinformation online, for high quality journalism, but we don't have a model to make that work and to be able to pay journalists from it at this stage. And that's why the magazines like the Bauer ones are now missing, and we don't see a viable way to replace the quality of the public discourse that they were creating.
I think these are obviously really critical issues, and there are some questions that have now started to come in. First one from Jeff, where he says there's been an online story or two about a possible rescue buyer for the listener. Is that wishful thinking, or is it a possibility?
So that one seemed to be addressed to me.
I think so. I've
heard some of the rumours, and I think there probably are people who are interested in the listener. How Bauer, as it leaves the country, would value the listener, what value it would put on the masthead and the archive, is quite hard to determine. I would say the more time that passes, the more the value declines, which might actually be to the advantage of a buyer. I would imagine that a buyer would have to be, in some respects, a kind of white knight, a kind of benign, benefactor. And like I said before, personally speaking, maybe I'll contextualize this. When I was the editor, which is actually quite a long time ago, the internet was just starting. And so I was responsible for overseeing the very first website the listener had, which probably from this vantage would look rather rudimentary, but was like everybody, we were experimenting and trying to figure out how you would use your online presence to complement what you were doing physically. But it seemed pretty clear pretty fast that the internet was not going to go away, and it was only going to get bigger, and more people were going to read more content online. At the same time, the listener struggled at the newsstand to compete with the noise from all of the other titles, particularly the sort of lifestyle and popular women's magazines and so on. But it had this really robust subscriber base, which I think when I left was up around 40,000, so say maybe 10,000 more than now. And the only real at that stage, the listener was owned by the O'Reilly Media Group, which still owned the Herald and so on. And occasionally a new CEO would turn up, which seemed to be sort of every 6 months or so, and say, "Tell us about your magazine, mate," and I got tired of that. But they'd always want, like, "What's your strategy?" And I'd said, well, the only strategy I can really see in this little market is that the golden goose is the subscriptions. You make it really hard for people not to subscribe. You add value to the subscription, and that would have something to do with the online presence of the magazine as well, which might mean that you don't have to compete so hard at the newsstand and keep compromising your editorial vision. Might allow you to become a little braver and take a few more risks, which in turn may pay off in terms of sales as people realize that there's something interesting going on at a magazine like that. Now, I'm not saying that would work, but it was a rudimentary, strategy, particularly for the online age. Now that we're 15 or so years down the track from there, I don't know how profitable anyone could make a magazine as a paper product that has to be distributed nationally when your news, unless you make it some kind of a subscriber-based operation with a strong online presence. But that still runs up against all of the problems that everybody is talking about today and always, which is the advertising model has had the guts sucked out of it by the internet giants. So I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but I would say it's not a fantasy, but you would really, really need to think very hard about inventing a new business model to make something like this work now.
Can I pick up on this? We've had a few questions coming in, and perhaps because of time, I'd like to summarise them. I think you've already addressed Myles's point about whether or not the listener could survive as a print form. Joanne talks about the subscriber base that was still, and the sales that were still strong. Gavin's talking about a broad church Bretton Woods #2 conference. I think, Gavin, maybe you'd like to say a little bit about that. But just so we introduce some more themes, Elizabeth's asking questions again about Bauer's noted website and the National Library or National Archive and whether that's saleable. And there are some other questions about whether or not, this is from Pip, could the listener be taken in-house and be the program promo print publication for the combined RNZ TVNZ broadcaster? So there are some other questions, but there are some themes there. So could Finlay or Jeremy talk to some of those? I mean, is there another business model? Could we even see the state taking a stake in print media? There was certainly a suggestion that perhaps the government had been premature in dismissing the overture of Bauer to actually sell them some of the publications for $1. Although what the state would have done with them, I think, is an interesting question.
Yeah, I think it's much less about the importance of print, but just about the importance of having a plurality of voices and a media that supports them, whatever channel that might be on. So in terms of the survival of a particular publication, I can see why the government didn't place a bet there. But I think one of the things I was also thinking about was that because of the pressure media has been under, there has been some degradation in the quality of some media products. Like if you look at Metro magazine, for example, when I worked there in the 90s, it had an editor, a deputy editor, and 5 staff writers. And then for the last few years, it's been surviving on sort of half a staff writer and an editor that works like a maniac. And the listener also had far fewer resources in its most recent years under Bauer than it did at any time in its history before that. So that's also resulted in a shift away from the resources that are available for, really important investigative journalism, for example, towards opinion columns and that kind of thing, which is much cheaper to create. So I think we need to take a step back from talking about saving, individual publications, and just look at the way that media has been changing because of the pressures it's been experiencing with this drop in revenue, and how we ensure that it remains as a pillar for democracy, which is really what we need it to act as.
Gavin, would you like to pick up on that and talk a bit about what you meant by a Broad Church Bretton Woods #2 conference?
Yeah, I've suggested recently that the business models of existing media are so broken that we need to have a complete reset of ownership, governance, and operations. But it's not simply for the media companies themselves to figure their way out of this, because too many of us have a stake in it to leave it to them. And quite frankly, their efforts to date haven't exactly been successful, have they? They've been on a downward trajectory that has very little upside to it. So what I suggested was, thinking back, and you're all probably, apart from Jeff Leyland, too young to remember this, the equivalent of the National Development Conference in the early 1970s, that looked holistically at where the country was at economically. Well, what I'm saying is that we need to have the equivalent, and I use the Bretton Woods example, that reset the financial structures of the world after the Second World War, that we need something of that magnitude to rethink the way in which we sustain media that we can't afford to be without. And I think that none of the existing models are sustainable, including the existing Television New Zealand and perhaps even Radio New Zealand models on their own are sustainable. We need a reset, and I think it's of such a scale that it needs to draw in all manner of interest. We take the Save Concert, for example. Those people would need to have a seat at the table. So would academics, so would NGOs and so on. In other words, we bring the country together to discuss the media ecosystem of the future, not just the media companies, because I don't think they're capable of doing it on their own. Facilitated by government probably, but not run by government. In other words, it's not simply a way of forcing government policy on the country, but the government obviously would have a role as facilitator. I really do believe it's got to the stage where things are so bad that we really do need to think on that sort of scale and magnitude.
We've had a few comments from Steve and Russell and Phil regarding the role of the state or government in sustaining journalism and possibly also print publications. Are there any thoughts about what possible shape or form that might take? I mean, because you know, there's a good argument to say that we don't want the government owning all the media, and keeping journalistic and editorial independence at arm's length from any funding agency is critical. But do we look at a model whereby, for example, we set up an independent public trust that's publicly owned, a bit like PBS, say? Or do we look at bringing it in the house, you know, making it the RNZ magazine, as it once was? Or do we look at a New Zealand on Air model where we fund public interest journalism on a contestable basis, you know, and we fund particular projects to support journalism and have a publicly funded publication, whether it's online or in print? What are the models that might work here?
I agree, Peter, and I remember just before Finlay left the Listener, it was criticised for being too pointy-headed. But I'm not saying anything about your shape of your head there now, Finlay, but all mine. But one of the things I like about Women's Weekly is that, you know, during the debates about corporal punishment and smacking, etc., you know, accessible to every New Zealander was a magazine that was covering these issues for every New Zealander in an accessible way. It wasn't just the Listener, whatever shade of opinion or sophistication it had. What I'm interested in is the model of the government not providing an SOE model, but providing tax concessions to beneficiaries, large and small. We don't have the philanthropy tradition in New Zealand as much as America, but we want to avoid corporate sort of mogul media, but also government dominated. So what's to stop governments providing generous tax concessions to people who put money forward, to setting up trusts for individual papers or magazines such as the Guardian model, and even ones in America that went through the Second Iraq War, still maintaining independence. So I'm a great fan of the trust model, and I totally agree with Gavin. It's got to the stage now where we need to have national input from all sorts of models, and not just the click popularity spin-off model that some have suggested, or, you know, combinations of NZME and stuff because it's the only way. I think we need to look at ways to retain independence. That's my view.
Okay. Jeremy, Finlay, Gavin, do you want to comment on this? Do you have a view?
The only thing that's been running through my mind listening to this conversation is that it is interesting watching Australia now talking about potentially charging the big internet giants for content, you know, or making it legal for them to have to pay, and which sort of touches on the whole idea of a digital services tax and so on. In anything like, I agree with Gavin that this requires a much bigger reset than individual companies, let alone mastheads, are capable of, and it does need to be state-led, I think. But it is probably going to require some degree of international cooperation if we are to, you know, go down that track. Because I think it's very hard for a little country like New Zealand to move unilaterally. Gavin?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Finlay, and I've suggested to Chris Farfoy that we join with Australia and the ACCC current initiative. It is not potentially charge them, it's going to happen. It is going to happen. And the ACCC has no patience any longer with those social media platforms, and they will work with the European Union to regularise the approaches. It's going to happen, and I think that we need to do it in concert rather than trying to do it independently, because if we try to do it on our own, it won't happen. But I think we've got a government to persuade, because they are still very, very much fans of social media.
Myles mentioned the New Zealand On Air model there, and I think that's interesting. If you could have a fund that was much larger that also funded written journalism, not just visual, I don't quite know how that would work, but there is a possible fund there. I think the problem is that you've got a large kind of freelance workforce that's pitching for projects that may not come through consistently, so it becomes a fairly unstable profession for the likes of the journalists you've seen at Bauer magazines across the board. But there may be something there worth exploring.
There's some really, really useful comments here. We can probably have about another 3 or 4 minutes. I'm just looking at some of the questions coming in. Someone's asked who's the ACCC. That's the Australian media regulator, and they're looking at putting some kind of charge on the digital intermediaries like Google and Facebook to generate some revenue for presumably public media. Now, we could have a long debate about that, but perhaps that's not the immediate issue for today. There are some questions also about other magazines, North and South, need to work actively with the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, who are holding the policy pen on this. I wonder if they're actually looking for the policy pen on this. So are there other themes about the models that we might pursue locally? I mean, there's been some talk, of course, this last week about the minister's package to try and rescue some of our media who are in dire straits because of the lockdown measures. There's been $50 million disbursed in various ways, some of that to be determined. But is that going to be enough? What else should the government be doing? What should better public media be asking the government to do, assuming that they might even listen?
I'll chuck a thought in the ring. I've often thought during these debates that I think back across broadcasting ministers, right back as far as I can remember, and I really don't remember any of them, and certainly none that have particularly impressed me. And I think it is such a poor cousin in terms of policy creation and priorities at cabinet level, that possibly one of the first challenges is to make this more critical, or them to understand how critical it is before we get any traction. I don't know how you do that, but I do think they need to see it as a crisis, a real crisis.
Jeremy, further thoughts? Gavin?
I was also thinking of the ProPublica Fund. Oh, sorry, Gavin, you go.
I think that if the owners of Stuff pulled the plug the way that Bauer has, that would be the crisis that would change things dramatically. I hope to God that never happens, but it could. It could happen. They are Australian owners who have their own issues at home. It could pull the plug, and having no Dom Post, no press, no Southland Times, no Waikato Times, and so on, that I think would be a cathartic moment for any government. We've got to avoid that, of course.
There's also the ProPublica Foundation in North America, which is a foundation that funds investigative journalism. It's really promising and it's done some great work, but the problem there is that it mostly collaborates with existing media organizations, and without the channels on which to put investigative journalism that is going to deliver a large audience, you haven't solved the problem. If you're looking for channels to distribute these really important pieces of work, and those channels are disappearing. So it's only part of the answer, but it is worth having a look at that if anyone's interested. The ProPublica website online.
ProPublica is quite an interesting model.
I
think there's going to be a huge debate around the second tranche, as Chris Farfoy has called it, regarding how government might support media through the COVID-19 chaos. After that, who knows? I think there's a need for a fundamental debate about the policy settings and the funding settings for media in New Zealand. Are there any pressing questions? Oh, there's a good question here from Kay. What of Maori and Pacific media content in journalists? If media should appeal and represent New Zealand, what change is needed? Could someone pick up on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to any model that we develop needs to be really vigilant about ensuring that there's a plurality of voices in the media and that those voices are allowed to bubble up to cater to whatever channels they need to, rather than being centrally controlled. The idea of a centrally controlled organisation leads to the danger that it, reinforces its own cultural bias and shuts down voices that need to be heard more loudly. So that's something that any model needs to take incredibly seriously.
I would agree. Gavin?
There is a project underway now on the future of Maori and Pacifica media, but it's being done in isolation from the others. There is some crossover, but it's being looked at in its own right. I do think that voice needs to come into the centre and not be dealt with as a standalone project, but as an integral part of the broader discussion of the ecosystem as a whole.
Okay. Well, I think we're probably going to have to wrap up the discussion there, but a very big thank you to Jeremy Hansen and Finlay Macdonald for taking the time to come and join us, and indeed Gavin and the other participants. There is some more to come. I'm going to say a little bit about BPM's view of what's going on, the state of the media nation. I'll be very, very brief about that, and Myles will sum up about some of the things that Better Public Media has been doing this year. And then afterwards we have our Better Public Media AGM. If you're a member, you're very welcome to join us. If you're not a member, you're very welcome to join us as a member and then join us. It's not very expensive. So as you're probably aware, I'm a media researcher. I'm an academic at Victoria University, and I'm also the outgoing chair of Better Public Media. I'll still be involved, but I'm going to be taking a bit of a back seat after this meeting, because I've been extremely busy with a whole bunch of other things in my academic life. But I think there are two big themes underpinning what BPM's looking at the moment, and that is, first of all, the big debate over the shape of public broadcasting, public media more generally. Obviously, the Chris Farfoy, since he's taken over as Minister of Broadcasting, Communications and Digital Media, has been very, very cautious in committing to a particular model, and it's taken a long time, really, to decide what direction he wants to go in. There was a ministerial advisory group that Claire Curran had set up that made suggestions, and Chris pretty much disbanded that. And he's had his own group of senior public sector advisors and people from PricewaterhouseCoopers talking to him about the possible shape of an RNZ and TVNZ merger. We were invited to some of those consultations. Got to say that the impression we got was that there was no certainty about the direction that this was going to take, and there were a lot of questions that remained unanswered regarding, first of all, the institutional structure, about exactly how RNZ might be attached to TVNZ. I mean, there was some reassurance that the currently non-commercial services of RNZ would not become commercial in any form of merger, but it leaves the big question about what shape and form TVNZ should take. Now, Better Public Media has, really since its inception, when we came out of the Save TVNZ 7 campaign, and we've argued that even with the decline in television viewing, at least linear scheduled television viewing, there's still a significant proportion of the population that does watch linear scheduled broadcasts. We've badly missed the range of content that was made possible even by a small channel like TVNZ 6 or 7. So how you fit that model into the behemoth that's still TVNZ, we're not quite sure. There have been some suggestions that TVNZ could, for example, be turned partially non-commercial. Well, if you want to turn, TV1 non-commercial, for example, there's at least $150 million a year that you'd have to find to cover the cost of the advertising. And from a treasury point of view, that comes on top of losing $150 million worth of advertising. Now, it turns out this plan is actually very popular with the private commercial broadcast sector, because they would stand to pick up at least a good chunk of any advertising that TV1 lost. But I don't see any likelihood of this happening in the short term. I mean, at the moment, the government promised $38 million injection into public media when it came into power in 2017. We're now on the cusp point of the next election, and the most they've put in is about 15. And so one of the things that's concerned me, and I've made this very clear to the Minister and to the Ministry for Culture and Heritage and PricewaterhouseCoopers that's doing the consulting, is that you look back at governments that have been supportive or non-supportive of public media, and even amongst those that have been supportive, that there's been a real reluctance to back the policy vision for public media with public money. If you go back and have a look at what Labour did between 1999 and 2008, I mean, and I think this is a case in point. I mean, they there tried to create a hybrid model with TVNZ. Many of you will remember the TVNZ Charter. I mean, I happened to be on one of the working groups that helped revise it before National came in and got rid of it. I don't think the Charter itself was a terrible idea, but what was a terrible idea is that you would have a public charter and a vision of public broadcasting, and then give TVNZ $15 million a year to try and become the BBC. That was less than 5% of TVNZ's operating revenue. And there was really no way that they were going to be able to balance the imposition of commercial pressures that they had to deal with at the same time as they had to deliver a public charter. And so trying to balance those two objectives was never going to be possible with that level of funding. There were huge arguments during that period between 1999 2008. Steve Mahari had some quite high-level disputes with the Minister of Finance, Michael Cullen, who was very reluctant to put significant funds into public broadcasting, and particularly reluctant to give it to TVNZ. And so when Labour came in, I must admit, I was more optimistic, because Claire Curran, although she might have made a few mistakes, was on good terms with Grant Robertson, and they both backed the Save TVNZ 7 campaign. So you had a Minister of Broadcasting and a Minister of Finance who were apparently singing from the same hymn sheet. And yet the very first budget, $38 million became 15, and that hasn't changed. So I'm quite worried about whether or not there's something going on within the power structures that always leaves public media and public broadcasting as a nice to have. I mean, obviously there's big concerns and justifiable concerns about health and education and welfare and pensions and many other areas of public policy that quite rightfully have a significant priority in cabinet thinking. But I think there's a terrible mistake that successive governments have made, which is that you can look at public media as only an afterthought, and that really it doesn't matter if you don't get round to it. And I really think in the current era that has to change. Now the paradox is that the government, I think, is coming round to recognising that they do need a significant change of policy within the sector. But given the crisis that the media were in well before COVID-19 came along, and now with COVID-19, they've been forced to refocus their attention away from the public media options and on to possibly trying to salvage what's left of the commercial media sector. So I wonder if the government's mindset is in the right place to really pursue the RNZ TVNZ merger. I'm not sure it's necessarily a good idea. But if the model is going to work, then they need to put significant public funding into TVNZ. And I'm not sure if there's the political or economic will to do so, particularly considering that whoever forms the next government, they're going to be looking at picking up the tab for all the outlay that's been attached to the COVID-19 measures, and that's huge. So I'm really very, very worried about this, and I'm hoping that the government, having put so much money into publicly supporting the economy, will start to realise that putting maybe 50 or 100 or possibly 200 million into public media perhaps isn't such a crazy idea as it currently thinks. But then I guess I'm an optimist. Okay, so that's my little summary. If we knew the future, we could all go down. Well, we couldn't go down the TAB at the moment. We could possibly go online. So Better Public Media has been plugging away. I guess we were gazumped a little bit by the Save RNZ Concert campaign, but we've been doing quite a lot behind the scenes, trying to pull some strings where we could, sometimes finding that they weren't attached to anything. But I'd like to hand over to our director, Myles Thomas. Myles, do you want to take over the debate?
Yes, thanks, Peter. Kia ora koutou. Hey, before I move on, I'll just explain to everyone, look, we're sort of moving now into more of our AGM part of the day, and we will not be offended if anyone decides that there's better things to do, like go out and enjoy the sunshine. But before you do, I would really like to congratulate, actually, the RNZ Concert, the Save RNZ Concert team, Elizabeth and everyone else who worked on it. I think they did an incredibly good job, and it was really impressive to watch, having been there myself with TVNZ7, just to see how they pulled all the different influences together was very impressive. So well done, and I really appreciate you guys also coming on today to talk to us about that. So thank you very much to you guys, and to Elizabeth in particular. Yeah, well done, well done. And also I wanted to thank, I think Gavin is still with us. Thank you, Gavin, for your really interesting points there, and also Finlay and Jeremy as well. And Simon, I think, he's emailed me. I think he got the times wrong or something. But I'd be interested to know, you'll have seen I put up a poll earlier. I'll put up another poll perhaps later on about whether we continue doing these types of Zoom meetings, because it's we've had a really strong response, and way more than our AGMs, and it seems like people, especially during lockdown, have time for a 1-hour meeting. So I might put up a poll and see how many other people are interested if we do another one on a monthly basis or not. Anyway, I'll get on to talking about, I'm now going to talk for a little bit about what BPM has been up to for the last year, and this is kind of like a director's report, I suppose. So it gets a little less interesting potentially. So I won't be offended if people want to sign off now. Yeah, so feel free to just disappear. And thank you very much. If you do, thank you very much for joining us. It's really been really great to have so much participation and interest. So Better Public Media in this year, it's been a really busy year for media in New Zealand and public media, lots of change, and that means a really big change. We've been very busy as well, because there's just, whenever there's a change or a public announcement of some kind, then we're required to make a comment or try and lobby, I guess, make the most of any opportunities there are to press the cause of public media. And that includes, for example, a merger of RNZ and TVNZ especially, but also if there was a continued merger of Stuff and NZME, then there are ramifications for public media in that as well. And we always feel obliged to get in there and say something about it. So we've been doing this for many years, and the good thing that seems to be happening is that we're becoming a bit of a bit of a reporter's go-to, I guess, is particularly Peter. He's and he always was anyway, but this year has been remarkable in that we've been getting a lot of media attention, which has been really great. And I think that's a little bit of a payoff after years of hard work. We could certainly do with more, and that would be, it's something we continue working on. One of the main positive effects we can have is to actually just influence public opinion via, or influence politicians' opinion and media's opinion via our public comments and influence that way. So looking at the last 12 months, in August we had we held a poll on reception issues for RNZ. RNZ, we'd heard from our members that a lot of them were struggling to receive RNZ. So we did a poll about that. We didn't really find it was particularly pronounced. So we didn't really follow that up. One thing we did follow up more so was advertising on podcasts from RNZ. RNZ podcasts, where they've started playing adverts when they appear on third-party platforms. So, for example, your podcast app on your phone now, I don't know if you'll have noticed, but they sometimes put an advert before or after their podcast, mainly podcasts that aren't news-based. So I first noticed it when we were playing in a science podcast for my stepson, and all of a sudden there was a 30-second ad for Zero at the start of it, which was very shouty and noisy, and now I notice them all the time, and it felt very jarring. So we've engaged with RNZ's board on that with emails and so forth, and we're not very satisfied with the response. It's considered to be within their remit. We question that. Ursula Chair, one of our trustees, led that discussion, and we're still, I guess, once lockdown is over, we're able to continue pursuing that with the board. It is all kind of tied up with everything else, which is mainly the merger of RNZ and TVNZ. We've also submitted to the Department of Internal Affairs classifications paper. Peter was more involved with that than myself. So Peter, if you are able to just explain briefly what that was about for people, I'd really appreciate it.
Sorry,
was that the Department of Internal Affairs, their classifications?
Oh, there are a couple of things that have been going on. That there's a bill that the Department of Internal Affairs put forward to try and incorporate what they called commercial video on demand, which means subscription services such as Netflix, into the classification regime used for film and literature. So in other words, that they'd have to start carrying a label that would indicate whether they were PG or R16 or suitable for certain audiences. And this has been a debate for some time. The issue that we raised, though, although we're not fundamentally opposed to this bill, that was I think is currently on hold, it may go through later, is that they left television out of it. And we couldn't understand why. About 18 months ago, we were involved in a quite a big workshop that the Ministry for Culture had organised with a wide range of media stakeholders, particularly on the broadcast side, where actually everyone disagreed about everything except the need for a consistent classification model across all the different media. So we're a little bit bemused as to why the Department of Internal Affairs pushed ahead to try and bolt subscription video services onto the film classifications regime, but left television out of it, because I think down the line there's a very good argument to incorporate that. Meanwhile, the Broadcasting Standards Authority has itself undergone an exercise refining the classifications regimes. It's brought the subscription and the free-to-air broadcast models more closely together. It's kept the watershed, and was glad to see that. We thought that was still important, and we argued for it. But there's still a little bit of a mismatch between the two. So hopefully in the future we'll get a more consistent model. But we didn't know why the government pushed one forward when they're probably within a few years going to have to change that legislation.
Thanks, Peter. So what was the outcome on that? Did have they come up with an actual decision on the classifications?
The Broadcasting Standards Authority. No, it's there's a bill in progress, I think, but it hasn't gone through yet.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so that's an example of the background work that Better Public Media does in terms of submissions to government papers and so forth. In October, we held the Better Public Media Student Challenge, which is now its second year, and this is a challenge. It's basically a competition that we run for high school students to try and get them thinking about the importance of public media, and we get them to write an essay, 1,000-word essay, or some sort of piece of content. They're allowed to make a video or a song. We've had a song one year, and so on, and we give them a $1,000 prize as an inducement to enter. We also have a $500 second prize and a $500 prize for the school. This year we held 2 of these, and we also broadened it out to include university students as well. And that deadline for that was in October this year. We didn't get a heck of a lot of entries, and we got no university entries. So obviously the university side of it wasn't a winner. It didn't work, but we do find that it does help in terms of raising awareness for teenagers through high schools, and it seems to have grown. So from the first year we had a few entries, and this year there was more, twice as much. And as the awareness grows, we are finding that it's just getting stronger. We're going to do another one this year. We've agreed to give it another crack, I suppose you could say, and we're going to alter the date for it. Last year it was the deadline was in October, which conflicts probably quite heavily with exams for students, and so we're going to hold this one this year much earlier in the year. I think it's going to be May or June. We're still finalising that. But and obviously we're not going to bother with the university students. But so that was quite a big part of our year. And Jeff Leland, our trustee, is the primary driver behind that. He's the judge, the head judge, and also with his partner, Josephine, who is a high school media studies teacher. They are able to network to all the media studies teachers around the country, and then get to the students as well. In November we released some market research, which we spent $2,000 on getting some market research done into public views on the importance of public media and what the government should do about it. And I'm just going to try and find the file that I've got, which will show the results of this, and I'll put it up on the
share screen.
Up on the share screen, yeah, because it's pretty interesting. Okay, so there you'll see on our screen there's basically the results of the market research that we did, and it was. Can
you enlarge that a little bit, Myles, please?
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure if I can. Give it a crack. Not sure that I can, sorry, Peter.
Okay.
There we go. Is that working for people? Is that better?
That's better. That's better.
Okay, great. So what that shows was just basically very strong support, not surprisingly, very strong support for making TV1 an ad-free channel and website. A lot of strong support for also removing advertising from TV1 only on weekends rather than across the whole schedule. Strong support for removing all advertising of TV1 and TV2 and TV and website, so making the whole of TVNZ non-commercial. We didn't ask people about the costs of it, because we don't know what the costs are, but it was more just to get an indication of what people's views were on this. Less support for expanding RNZ to include an ad-free television channel, which I guess is the RNZ Plus model. So less support for that. The video on demand website app for New Zealand programs, a standalone public online model had less support, and so on. A strong support for taxing large companies like Facebook or Google. And I think that's pretty much universal now, that people are in support of making Google, Facebook, etc., pay for the media. So so that was quite well received, that research, and it actually came out the day before New Zealand On Air's research, which backed it up in terms of similar responses from the public. In November, the leaks about the RNZ TVNZ merger model started to come out, and so we were obviously commenting on that quite heavily. And then we were expecting an announcement by the end of the year from Chris Farfaway. He'd promised it regarding all the research they've been doing for now 2 or 3 years since they became government about what to do with public media, and then that announcement wasn't forthcoming. So we were quite miffed about that, and we put out some press. We were just trying to pressure the government to do something, make announcements, and it seems like there's quite a bit of politicking in the background between the coalition, between the different partners. If anyone has any information on that, I'd be very grateful to find out what was going on there in terms of between the different coalition partners. In January, the merger was the plan for a merger was announced in February, and that was we weren't 100% sure that it was a great idea, but we think that there's potential for it. It really depends on the details of whether RNZ is safe and TVNZ is funded better, because basically it really comes down to funding, and this is one of the main messages that we were pushing out there. From Gavin Ellis's comments today, it seems like RNZ is safe as far as we know, and as long as the current minister remains the Minister of Broadcasting. But then, of course, as we know, that can change quite quickly, and the direction can change again. So, you know, there is a danger that we lose RNZ, and we have to keep the pressure on that we don't. Now I'm just going to try and look at how to unshare.
Top.
Oh yeah, thank you. Right. So okay. So yeah, and then obviously RNZ Concert was announced that it was going to be what's the word? Relegated, diminished, somewhat. Decimated, yeah. And we were obviously really upset about that, and very concerned. And then it turned out that the rest of New Zealand, well, a large proportion of New Zealanders were up in arms, absolutely shocked. And that was really great to see that strength of that outpouring of support for RNZ Concert, and it is a really great result too. And obviously, as Elizabeth has said, it's not over yet, you know, and we have to make sure that it doesn't go backwards. I mean, it's not surprising that the staff of RNZ Concert feel uncertain of their positions, because they really were let down by their own management there, and I guess they will never really feel safe until as while those managers are there, or that a much stronger assurance is made, and the final decision is made. And then of course there's the whole RNZ Concert, the RNZ TVNZ merger as well, which throws everything into a certain level of doubt as well.
Would this be a good moment, Myles, for us to mention the short recommendation that our campaign had to your organisation?
Yes, absolutely.
I'll put that up in the chat right now.
Okay.
So that's basically, and Andy, I think, is here and will talk to that.
Okay, yep, that sounds good.
Briefly. Has that appeared in the chat, or have I not managed to send it yet? Hang on, coming now. There we are.
Okay, so this is a remit from you, Elizabeth, for our AGM?
Yes, I don't know if it's a remit or what it is, but it's basically a recommendation, and we thought if the BPM Trust would like to pass this as a resolution, it's not really committing you to anything much except supporting what we're doing.
Sounds great. I don't think any of us would have any trouble with that.
I think this might be one of the shorter debates, I think.
But Andy, is Andy still there?
I am.
So Andy, you might want to just say something about that. Because Andy was one of the people who set up the Facebook page, and he and his colleagues have been really wise voices moderating that page.
Thank you, Elizabeth. There are 4 of us admins for the Facebook page, and I guess we would like you to support us with this resolution. It's been an interesting campaign, the Save RNZ Concert Facebook page. It's at times it has been very busy. It was able to gain momentum very quickly. It's pretty much as soon as the news hit the ground. Michael Pringle got the page up and running, and soon Ari and Eddie were admins, and I volunteered to admin as well. It's one of the things that we have sought to do is to keep our campaign relentlessly positive and relentlessly constructive, but also to ensure that there was no doubt in anybody's mind that the people are angry at what was being done, and that we could maintain pressure if need be to ensure that the right outcomes happened. It's been a bit of a distraction from that, this COVID-19 lockdown. We have sought to keep the group together so that we could reapply pressure if we need to. But also importantly, we've also sought to make sure that our group was a place where people could feel safe during this ghastly time. And so we've made our group COVID-19 free, where we keep the group together and keep positive messaging happening. And I think we've succeeded. And so as one of the many tools that can be deployed towards helping to keep Radio New Zealand Concert going, we see our group as being one of those integral things that we can offer to help preserve this valuable treasure that New Zealand has. And so Elizabeth has posted a resolution which you can read in the group chat, and we would like your support by voting in favor of this resolution.
Myles, do you want to facilitate that?
It sounds good. I mean,
so
I'm not sure if we've got enough. If we're only members at the moment, we just have to move to our only members only part of a meeting.
All right. It says that the BPM Trust supports the objectives of the Save RNZ Concert campaign to achieve a secure, well-resourced and bright future for the RNZ Concert network.
Yeah. So we'll vote on that at the once we move into the actual AGM and we go to members only.
Thank you, Myles.
But thank you, Andy and Elizabeth. Yeah, we really appreciate that you're putting that forward.